What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Nightblade Bow build. So, Nightblade Bow builds are probably going to be one of the stronger Bow specs in the game out of all 6 classes, and out of the 3 classes that, in my opinion, can most effectively use the Bow build, Nightblades are probably going to be one of the simpler ones to learn, mainly because your primary spam bull is really just going to be Lethal Arrow, which is fairly easy to kind of maintain. The rotation force Nightblade Bow build is a little bit simpler compared to having to use Blast Bones or Subterranean Assault on a Necromancer or Warden respectively. In addition, Nightblades could also make good use of Killer's Blade as well in executes, assuming that they're willing to basically give up their sort of bow identity and go within melee range in order to use Killer's Blade in execute. So the fact that they do have that execute option there also makes them potentially very strong in certain scenarios where you might be able to get within melee range to use your Killer's Blade, even though you would be playing, typically speaking, at range as a bow build. So just like the rest of our build videos, we will not be going over any sort of gear. I went over gear in a separate video, which will be popping up in the upper right hand corner right about now. This video is going to be focusing in more on the rotation, as well as the parse, and kind of how bow builds kind of play out in endgame PvE content. So let's go ahead and get started here first with our front bar. So I am running Tzogvins here, so just to clear up our gear situation, I am running Relequens, Slimecraw, Kra'ghs, and Tzogvins as a front bar here, and then I have the Maelstrom on the back bar. So this is the front bar. This is just the Tzogvin's Bow. We have Lethal Arrow, Poison Injection, Camouflaged Hunter, Relentless Focus, and Barbed Trap. So because we're running Tzogvins, we don't need to run anything for Minor Force, but you can run Minor Force if you so desire through Challenge Acceleration. It's up to you where you want to put it, so you could put it here on the front bar, but I'd recommend against it because you do want to maintain the additional weapon damage you get from slotting these Fighter Guild abilities. On your back bar, this is the Maelstrom bar. We have Relentless Focus. This is just to maintain the Assassination passive Hemorrhage for additional crit damage. Barbed Trap again, Endless Hail, Leeching Strikes, Dark Shade, and Ballista. So here on the back bar, this is where I'd probably end up running Challenge Acceleration if I needed Minor Force. Let's say I'm running Lokkestiiz as my front bar set. Then I'd probably say get rid of either Leeching Strikes or Barbed Trap and replace them with Challenge Acceleration instead, or Lightweight Beast Trap if you can't run Challenge Acceleration here. You might not need to run Leeching Strikes. At the very least, I found that I don't really need to use it once or twice in a 200 million dummy parse in order to fully sustain lat attack rotation. Part of it is because we are using Lethal Arrow, which does have a 1 second cast time. So we're getting fewer casts, essentially, which basically gives us a little bit more regen compared to using an instant cast spam bull. So you might not need to run Leeching Strikes. If you don't need Leeching Strikes, then you could replace this with just another Fighter's Guild ability to basically increase your weapon damage on your back bar as well. Now, if you want to use Killer's Blade on the front bar, then just replace either Camouflage Hunter or Barbed Trap here. You could also replace Poison Injection if you want. We're still going to be running Poison Injection here throughout the whole parse, but ideally you're going to want to run this only during Execute. So you could replace this with Killer's Blade instead. It's up to you. But I would probably say you're better off replacing Camouflage Hunter or Barbed Trap with Killer's Blade if you're going to go that route. And on the front bar here, we are running Incapacitating Strike for the Reeve passive. This is one of the reasons why we don't really need to run Leeching Strikes very often. And that's because we are getting some additional stamina back whenever we're dealing dealing damage to light or heavy attack whenever we have a negative effect on them. And negative effects do include things like the poison and the minor defile that you apply with Lethal Arrow. So you should pretty much always be getting the Reeve passive proccing, so that does improve our overall sustain. And our back bar, Ballista is going to be our primary damage ultimate that we're going to be using here. So that's pretty much it for skills. There's not really much that you can really replace here. The only real one is going to be Killer's Blade. Again, just replace the Fighter's Guild ability. Then on the back bar, if you're running Lokkestiiz instead of Tzogvin, so you need a source of Minor Force, then you'd want to run either Challenge Acceleration or Lightweight Beast Trap for the Minor Force. So not really too much when it comes to flexibility. Of course, if you do need a self-heal, you can always run something like Vigor, which is pretty nice, pretty strong self-heal here. You'd probably probably want to replace something on the back bar in order to get the self-heal, but you could also just replace another fighter skilled ability here on the front bar. You will obviously be losing DPS if you're running a self-heal. Ideally, your healers should be able to cover all situations where you need the heal, so it's kind of up to you whether you want to run that self-heal of Echoing Vigor. Beyond that, there are a few other damage mitigation moves you could run, like Mirage for the Major Evasion and Minor Resolve. Again, you'll just be replacing any sort of fighter skilled abilities. All the fighter skilled abilities here are pretty much just here for the additional weapon damage. So if you want an ability you want to run, then you can just replace any of the fighter skilled abilities. But Mirage and Vigor are probably going to be more than enough to get you through pretty much most content, if not all content in the game, in terms of mitigation and self-heals. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that Nightblades have the simplest bow rotation, and it is pretty true, because if you think about it, you only really need to maintain 3 dots, essentially, 3 abilities. Endless Hail, Poison Injection, and your bow proc here with Relentless Focus. If you're running Lokkestiiz, then you have a fourth one, you have Chunk Acceleration. But beyond that, it's just basically lethal arrow spam. So we're going to be doing this on the 3 million dummy. We're essentially just pre-buff, and you just go to town. And you're just keeping an eye on your dots, and then using your bow proc whenever it happens to proc. So again, you can see here, pretty simple. Oh, I forgot to activate Dark Shade, so that's the other thing. So you do something like Dark Shade here. So you can see here, fairly straightforward. And you're just maintaining your eye on all your dots and just using your bow proc whenever it happens to pop up. Fairly easy, fairly straightforward. Now you are going to need to end up breaking your rotation. Oh, I forgot my Endless Hail still going. You will need to end up breaking your rotation a little bit on your back bar here, just because differing dot timers. You have 14 seconds on Endless Hail, 20 on Dark Shade, and 10 on Poison Injection. So it's going to be a little bit staggered, so it's still kind of dynamic, but because it's only 3 dots, it's fairly easy to maintain and keep an eye on those dots and just, re-up them when necessary. Now, just like with your dual-wield bow builds, dual-wield Nightblade builds, you are going to be wanting to pay attention to when you activate your bow proc. So again, much like on your dual-wield build, when you hit 4, you're going to want to do light attack bow proc, so you're not going to want to do something like this. You're at 4, you do light attack ability, then do another bow proc. You basically just wasted a light attack, weaving from your 5th light attack ability, 6th light attack bow proc, so you basically wasted that 6th light attack. So again, you're going to want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then light attack bow proc. It's even more important here on a bow build compared to a dual wield build because we're running lethal arrow, and that is a cast time. So if you think about it, you're wasting quite a bit of time and potentially losing out on a lot of damage if you decide to go with the 6 light attacks and then bow proc rather than 5 light attacks and then bow proc, because you're eating up a lot of time with that cast time that lethal arrow has. And then in Execute, if you are running Killer's Blade, just when you hit 25%, just run up to melee range and just start using Killer's Blade rather than Lethal Arrow here. So that's what you would do if you're running Killer's Blade. So again, pretty straightforward. Now, if you are running a bow build, generally speaking, you're going to want to be as far away as you possibly can while still being able to hit things with your abilities. For a bow build, it's going to be 28 meters or so, because that is the distance for Poison Injection and Endless Hail. So once you get outside of 28 meters, that's when you're going to not be able to hit things. So you can see right here, this is about 28 meters. If you kind of want like a distance comparison here, if you have these blocks, it's essentially 2.5 of these blocks here. And you are going to want to basically maintain as much distance as you can, because the bow bar does have a couple of passive abilities that increases damage bonuses when you're at longer range, like long shots. You are going to want to back up pretty much as far back as you possibly can go, again, while still being able to use Poison Injection. Poison Injection is going to be kind of your standard here. It's 28 meters. And obviously you are going to close this gap if you decide to run Killer's Blade, but not all bow builds are going to be running Killer's Blade. So that's kind of be on a case-by-case scenario. So we are going to do a 21 mm parse. Let me just move this out of the way first. So much like I mentioned in the other build videos, the 21 damage parse is not necessarily indicative of how a build is going to perform in an actual raid environment. In a real raid environment, we are getting some more debuffs like martial knowledge, Zens, major vulnerability that we're not getting here. Plus, we're getting some additional sustain bonuses that we're not getting here on the trial dummy. So we're missing things like Symphony of Blades, the Master's Restoration Staff, and additional synergies as well. Just keep that in mind here. We are using Lava Foot to try to mimic raid sustain, but that's not really a one-to-one scenario here. So don't necessarily use this parse to kind of be indicative of how a build will perform in a raid. This is more for a comparison purposes for other bow builds, as well as just to give you guys an idea of what the rotation looks like. Let's go ahead and get started here. Again, free buff. Oh, I have to get a little bit closer for Ballista, I just realized. The one thing I will note here is that because we have a cast time, you're going to want to be a little bit mindful of when you activate synergies and your potions. That's because during the cast time you actually aren't able to do anything. And that includes taking synergies and using potions. You can see here in terms of sustain, pretty easy to sustain. We don't really need to run Leeching Strikes very often, but if you do need to sustain, you can go ahead and run Leeching Strikes if you need it. Oops. See, pretty straightforward. And then once we get to execute, nothing much is going to change because we're not running Killer's Blade. If I was running Killer's Blade, I'd get within melee range starting at about 25%. In order to get my Killer's Blade to execute damage going. So yeah, if you can avoid running Leeching Strikes, I would recommend doing so, because it eats out another global cooldown from your rotation, which could be used on another lethal arrow instead. So at this point, if I was running Killer's Blade, I'd be running in there. In Execute, you still want to use the bow proc, unlike with the dual wield build, because we're not running Killer's Blade. If you're running Killer's Blade, then you won't need to use the bow proc. Alright, and there we have it. That is the bow build for a Stamina Nightblade. Again, fairly straightforward. You only really have 3 dots to maintain, and there's no real sort of intensive bar swapping going on that you would see on like a Necromancer or a Warden bow build. In terms of DPS pulled, 74.6k or so. I have pulled upwards of about 75, 76k with this build. So a little bit of probably crit RNG involved here. But yeah, it's probably a little bit of crit RNG here because we have mean of 66.3. I think this is still bugged, so this should be a little bit higher. I think my mean crit chance is on my front bar is something like 76 or something like that. Yeah, 80.5. So definitely, probably a little bit of crit RNG here for the lower DPS, but 74.6 is still pretty good. And obviously, if I was running Killer's Blade, it'd be even higher. It'd probably be somewhere closer to probably around 80k or so. Killer's Blade adds a lot of DPS and executes, especially if you're running 3 Bloodthirsty. But that concludes this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions at all about the bow build, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.